With temperatures soaring past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, in ancient Egypt, food should have spoiled in hours. Yet somehow, the Egyptians kept milk fresh and even ice from melting. From harvesting ice in the middle of the desert to storing food inside tombs, their cooling methods are downright unbelievable. Here are 20 techniques the ancient Egyptians used to keep their food cold. The Pharaoh's Frost. In the heart of Thebes, under the rule of Ramesses II, the palace was always alive with activity, even at night. As the city slept, a select group of servants and priests prepared for a delicate task. Under strict orders, they carried wide, shallow clay basins into the open courtyards of the royal estate. The basins, carved from Nile silt and baked under the sun, were positioned carefully, each one angled to capture the maximum cooling effect of the night air. Egyptians know that although the sun blazed during the day, the air above the Nile Delta cooled significantly, and by midnight, a thin layer of frost began to form on the surface of the water. The process was slow and fragile. If the basins were too deep, the water wouldn't cool fast enough. If the air was too warm, no ice would form at all. Before the first light of dawn, workers hurried to collect the delicate sheets of ice before the rising sun could undo their efforts. They stacked the ice carefully in underground storage chambers, each layer separated by straw or sawdust to slow down melting. Inside these dark, insulated pits, the ice remained usable for days, long enough for the pharaoh to enjoy cool drinks, soothe fevers, and even impress foreign dignitaries with the rare luxury of chilled fruit and honey. But not all of Egypt's ice came from the desert air. Egyptian traders, particularly those dealing with the Hittites and Mesopotamians, occasionally transported larger ice blocks from the distant northern mountains. They're packed tightly in thick cloth and loaded onto camel caravans, taking weeks to arrive. But when they did, they were stored alongside the naturally harvested ice, ensuring that the elite had access to cool refreshment even in the peak of summer. This was more than just comfort, it was a symbol of status. To control ice in a land of fire was to wield power over nature itself. Beyond luxury, it played a crucial role in temple rituals and offerings, where food preservation was sacred. Even today, a version of this technique is still used in high-altitude villages, where water left in shallow trays overnight freezes by dawn, proving that the wisdom of the ancients never truly melts away. The desert's cold embrace. As the sun dipped below the dunes, the scorching heat of the Egyptian day slowly gave way to the unexpected chill of the desert night. In the palace courtyard of Elephantine, servants carefully arranged shallow stone basins filled with water and food, knowing that by dawn, the contents would be much cooler than anything stored indoors. Farmers and merchants used this trick to cool fresh milk and wine, leaving clay jugs in courtyards, rooftops, or open storage areas overnight. Even priests preparing temple offerings took advantage of this method, ensuring that sacred food left for the gods remained fresh until sunrise. Egyptians understood the strange power of their land. While the sun burned fiercely during the day, the clear desert skies let heat escape rapidly at night. By placing food and water outside in the open air, particularly in shallow basins or large, flat stone dishes, they allowed the cold desert winds to naturally lower the temperature. This was one of Egypt's simplest cooling techniques, requiring no special tools, just patience and knowledge of how the desert worked. Even today, some desert communities still use this method, leaving water in wide containers overnight to cool before the heat of the day returns. Egyptians mastered the art of using the land's extremes to their advantage, turning the desert's cold nights into nature's refrigerator. Buried beneath the sun. In the oasis of Siwa, the farmers there always stepped into their partially sunken storage house, grateful for the drop in temperature. Outside, the midday heat burned the earth, but inside, their grains, dates, and dried fish remained cool and safe from the relentless sun. Farmers and granary workers built semi-buried storage houses by digging partway into the ground and covering the structure with mud brick walls and thick thatched roofs. Egyptians understood that burying food, even partially, protected it from extreme heat. The earth acted as natural insulation, keeping the inside temperature far lower than the open air above. In military camps and desert outposts, soldiers dug shallow storage pits covered with woven mats to preserve dried meat, fruits, and water supplies during long campaigns. Temples also used this method, partially burying food storage rooms beneath temple courtyards to protect sacred offerings from spoiling. This technique wasn't just a trick of survival, it was essential for trade and everyday life. Without it, food would spoil faster, making long-distance trade difficult and reducing food security. Even today, some cultures still use semi-buried storage, from underground cellars to earth-cooled homes. The Pharaoh's hidden pantry. Egyptians discovered that underground spaces, like tombs and natural caves, stayed cooler than the open air. Wealthy families and temple granaries often used these spaces for food storage, keeping perishable goods away from the relentless sun. Thick stone walls blocked heat, while deep burial chambers maintained stable, cool air, protecting food for weeks or even months. Deep within the limestone cliffs of the northern city of Tanis, the overseers lead a group of temple workers into a hidden chamber, their torches flickering against the cool stone walls. Unlike the scorching heat outside, the air here was noticeably cooler, a natural gift of the earth. Inside, large sealed jars of grains, fruits, and even dried fish rested safely, kept fresh by the cave's steady temperature. In desert regions, travellers and soldiers sought out rock-cut tombs or hidden caves to store food supplies during long journeys. These locations acted as natural cold rooms, slowing spoilage and keeping water cooler than if it were left outside. Even some palace kitchens had stone-lined storage rooms built underground to hold grains, oils, and temple offerings. This technique is still used today in wine cellars, underground food storage, and naturally cool stone houses in hot regions. The Egyptians understood something simple, yet brilliant. When the sun is unbearable, the earth itself provides relief. Beating the sun. In desert homes in ancient Egypt, roofs were coated with a layer of white plaster or polished clay, keeping the interiors cooler than the outside air. Even some temples where food offerings were stored had smooth, light-coloured stone surfaces that helped deflect heat, preserving sacred items longer. At the heart of the busy markets of Bubastis, merchants arranged their food stalls under large white canopies, their surfaces gleaming under the sun. Unlike dark-coloured materials, these bright, reflective surfaces kept the area cooler, protecting goods like fresh bread, vegetables, and milk from spoiling too quickly. Egyptians understood the power of light and heat reflection. By using whitewashed surfaces, polished limestone, and bright linen fabrics, they reduced the amount of heat absorbed by storage areas. Market stalls, granaries, and even palace courtyards were often painted in pale colours, reflecting sunlight instead of trapping it. This method wasn't just for comfort, it was essential for survival. Without it, food supplies would spoil far faster under the Egyptian sun. Even today, white roofs and reflective surfaces are used in hot climates worldwide, helping keep buildings cool and reducing heat absorption. The Nile's secret cooler. In ancient Egypt, one thing you'd see for sure at the edge of the Nile was merchants kneeling beside the river, carefully lowering a sealed clay jar into the water. Inside, fresh milk, wrapped fish, and pomegranate juice remained cool, protected from the scorching Egyptian heat. In a land where the sun could dry out food in hours, the river itself became a natural refrigerator. Though the Nile's role has changed over time, this ancient method is still in use today. In some rural areas, people submerge water-filled clay pots in rivers or wells to keep drinks cool. It's a simple, effective way to fight the heat, one that Egyptians mastered thousands of years ago. Egyptians knew that water, especially moving water, absorbed heat and kept objects cooler than the air above. Farmers and traders took advantage of this, tying food-filled jars to wooden poles and submerging them in canals, wells, or along the riverbank. The constant flow of the Nile drew heat away from the jars, slowing spoilage and keeping food fresh longer. This method was particularly valuable in markets and journeys. Fishermen, for example, stored their catch in tightly sealed baskets placed in shallow waters near the docks of Memphis, ensuring that their fish stayed fresh before being sold to palace kitchens. Even temple workers used this method to store offerings of fruit and wine before placing them before the gods. Saltwater soaked cloth. The kitchens of the pharaoh's palace are always busy with servants rushing to prepare fresh meat and milk for the evening feast. But the thing is, in the sweltering Egyptian heat, food could spoil in hours. Without ice, they needed another way to keep food cool before it reached the royal table. Their solution? Saltwater cooling. This method was especially useful for travelers and traders. Before long journeys across the desert, merchants wrapped sacks of dried fish and dates in wet, salty fabric, protecting them from the relentless heat. Even temple workers, preparing offerings for the gods, used this trick to ensure that fresh food stayed cool until it could be placed before the sacred altars. Egyptians understood that salt drew out moisture and helped keep things cold longer. To cool fresh food, they took linen cloth, soaked it in salty water, and wrapped it tightly around jars of milk, fruit, or fish. As the water slowly evaporated, it carried heat away, lowering the temperature inside. If placed in a breezy area, this effect was even stronger, keeping food cool for longer. Though modern refrigeration has taken over, saltwater cooling is still used today. In some villages, people wrap bottles in damp cloth to keep drinks cold in the sun. Dew collection for cooling. Egyptians know that the desert air, though dry, held moisture at night. By spreading cloth or smooth stone slabs in open fields or rooftops, they allowed the cool night air to form small droplets of water by morning. These droplets were collected and stored in shaded clay jars, used to wet cooling fabrics, rinse fruits, or dampen storage baskets to keep them from drying out too quickly. As the first light of dawn touched the golden temples of Karnak, farmers bent over large sheets of linen, carefully wringing out fresh droplets of dew into clay pots. This water, gathered overnight, wasn't just for drinking. It was used for cooling food and keeping the day's supplies fresh. This method was particularly useful for desert travelers and market vendors who needed small amounts of fresh, cold water throughout the day. Even temple priests, who prepared food for religious ceremonies, used dew to freshen produce offerings, ensuring they remained vibrant and unspoiled under the hot Egyptian sun. Today, dew collection is still used in dry regions where water is scarce. Some farmers use similar techniques, placing plastic sheets or smooth surfaces to capture morning moisture. The Egyptians, always ahead of their time, turned even the smallest drops of water into a powerful tool against the heat. The Nile's hidden chill. Temple workers used this system to keep food offerings cool before presenting them to the gods, while wealthy merchants and palace kitchens built similar cooling chambers along aqueduct-fed courtyards. Some estates even had wet stone floors, where water slowly trickled through grooves, cooling the entire space. In the grand storage halls of Karnak Temple, the priest steps into the cool sanctuary where offerings of fruit, fish, and fresh milk were carefully preserved. Unlike the scorching heat outside, this chamber was refreshingly cool thanks to an ingenious Egyptian technique, water-cooled storage. Egyptians understood that moving water absorbed heat, so they built stone-lined channels that carried water from the Nile or nearby canals around their storage areas. As the water flowed through these narrow channels, it absorbed heat from the surrounding air, naturally lowering the temperature inside. The principle behind this method is still used today. Modern cooling systems in water-powered mills, underground aqueducts, and heat exchange pipes follow the same concept. This method played a critical role in food preservation, keeping milk from spoiling before it could be used in religious rituals, ensuring fish remained fresh longer, and allowing royal feasts to have cold drinks even in the middle of the desert. The Pharaoh's natural refrigerator. In the busy streets of Memphis, servants place a jug of fresh goat's milk inside a large clay pot and set it in the shade near an open window. The afternoon heat was rising, but the milk inside would stay cool for hours. The secret? The clay itself. Egyptians knew that certain types of clay could keep food cool. These pots, made from Nile mud, had tiny holes too small to see. When filled with water or damp sand, they soaked up moisture. As the water slowly evaporated into the dry air, it pulled heat away, cooling the inside of the pot. It was simple but effective, like an early kind of refrigerator. In markets, traders kept fruit, beer and fresh water in these clay pots, placing them in breezy courtyards to stay cool. In palaces and temples, the wealthy used a more advanced version, one pot inside another, with wet sand in between. This created an even stronger cooling effect, allowing Pharaoh's wine to stay chilled longer than the scorching desert would allow. For common people, this method was a lifesaver. It kept milk fresh for longer and stopped fruit from spoiling too quickly. Even today, zir pots are still used in hot climates, proving that Egypt's ancient cooling trick still works thousands of years later. The magic of the zir pot. In the dusty markets of Heliopolis, you'd see merchants reaching inside a large clay pot, pulling out a jug of water that felt surprisingly cool to the touch. Around them, rows of food jars sat inside similar pots, nestled in damp sand. This was no ordinary storage. It was Egypt's creative double-pot cooling system, the early ancestor of modern refrigerators. The process was simple, but brilliant. A smaller clay pot was placed inside a larger one, with wet sand packed in the space between them. As the water in the sand slowly evaporated, it pulled heat away from the inner pot, creating a cooling effect. The drier the air, the faster the water evaporated, and the colder the food inside became. Egyptians used this method to store milk, fresh fruits, and even beer, keeping them cool for days longer than they would last in the open air. Bakers and brewers relied on these pots to prevent spoilage before their goods could be sold, and royal households placed them in ventilated courtyards, maximizing the cooling effect. Even today, this method lives on. In parts of North Africa and the Middle East, zir pots are still used to keep vegetables fresh without electricity. This ancient Egyptian technique proves that sometimes the simplest ideas can outlast even the most advanced technology. Cooling with water. Egyptians understood that when water evaporates, it takes heat with it. To keep food from spoiling, they wrapped it in wet linen or soaked papyrus leaves and placed it in shaded, breezy areas. The moisture from the cloth drew heat away, keeping the food cool for hours. That's why when you walk into any palace, you'd see the palace servants rush through the halls of Karnak, carrying a bundle of fresh fish wrapped in damp linen. They are mostly for when the royal feast is hours away, and the fish caught that morning from the Nile needed to stay cool until it was cooked. Without ice or refrigeration, the Egyptians turned to one of the oldest tricks in the book, evaporative cooling with wet cloth. This method was commonly used in markets, temples, and homes. Merchants wrapped fresh produce in damp fabric before transporting it across the desert. Scribes and temple workers, recording food offerings, ensured that milk and fruit were kept wrapped in cool cloth before being placed in the sacred chambers. Even soldiers on military campaigns wrapped water skins in damp cloth, hanging them from their tents